다음은 알렉산드로 하타미 더 페이스메이커스 대표님을 모시겠습니다. 알렉산드로 하타미 대표님께서는 과거 페이팔 이사, G 캐피탈의 유럽 담당 이사 등을 역임한 바 있으며 현재는 여러 혁신 기업들에서 자문위원과 투자자로 활동하고 계십니다. 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. Please welcome him with applause.
Thank you. Good morning. Just wanted to start off with an interesting conversation I had last night while we were having dinner with some of the other speakers. And we were talking about all how amazing things about fintech and how the blockchain and cryptocurrencies are changing banking and how we are engaging differently with customers using fintech. Then Denise's presentation today also described some of the new ways of engaging to the customer. But what I thought was really interesting about that was the fact that it reminded me of banking when banking started in the 14th century in Italy, in Genoa. I'm Italian, so I would say that we started in Italy. In that situation, you had a relationship between two individuals. You had the banker and you had the customer. And these two people trusted each other. The banker knew exactly what the customer wanted and understood everything about the customer. They knew who their parents were, they knew where the family was, they understood the business, etc. The consumer, the customer, knew that the banker was not going to take advantage of him and that there would be a relationship of partners and trust. Because he knew that if something was wrong, the whole of society of that town, the Genoa in Italy, would know that this banker took advantage and was dishonest with the man. So at the core of digital, at the core of what fintech is doing is the customer. And what has happened in the last few years that has dramatically changed everything is the convergence of certain things. Firstly is the concept of the technology as a new platform that has been created. This is like a planet that exists with opportunities and possibilities that are beyond what was possible years ago. The communication dimension, the engagement on the internet, that everybody communicating with each other, the ability to process data and analyze data, the ability to have clear, descriptive devices that actually hold data for you at the point of need was what drove the whole thing. On top of that is the customer and how the customers are actually feeling that they can engage and use this technology to have a better level of service, to have a better engagement with their bank. Second pylon on top of this is the whole concept of innovation. This technology came in, we have customers that are using it, people started innovating and creating new opportunities and new ways of doing things. And to bring it all together, to increase its size, to make it increase its magnitude, is the availability of capital. Capital and the availability of that and the ease of access to that has completely changed all of what we know as fintech. But I thought it would be real interesting for us to start off in looking at every one of these to a certain extent and just giving you a few snapshots on the impact on each one of these three fundamental columns of innovation. The first one is customers and the growth of smartphones. And this is an interesting slide. All of us know that smartphones are important, that everybody's using them, that their penetration is huge, and so on and so forth. But if you look at the 2017 number, we're talking about around 5 billion mobile phone accounts. That's about the same number as bank accounts worldwide. So there's the same number of people that have bank accounts that have phones. And this is going to be very much a driver going forward. Mobile phones are going to be the means or the desired means for people, the preferred means for people to engage with their banks. And the reason for that is that they are in everybody's pockets, and there's a very large number of companies that are creating services that are available on that, and customers are expecting these banking services to be available on their mobile phones. Secondly is the level of dissatisfaction with customers. I think this is interesting statistics that was put together by E&Y in the UK, the British Banking Association, and FCA, and Sealant. Worldwide, 77% of customers are unhappy with their banks. So 80% of your customers are not happy. They would like something more. And this is driven by a variety of things, the financial crises, corruption, and so on and so forth. But what fundamentally is that they are comparing what their bank is offering them to everything else that's available to them in the market. 65% of their customers also don't trust their banks. They don't think the banks are just doing poorly. They actually think they're not trustworthy, that they're not worthy of sharing. That dimension that I mentioned to you about what was happening in Genoa 500 years ago, that is gone. Customers actually think the bank is not there for their welfare. They think it's there for taking advantage of them. If you look at the small businesses, the world of the small business, 38% of them, 40% of them are happy not to work with the bank, to work with a startup, with a fintech, to work with a third party that helps them engage and deliver whatever they want to do. As I said, mobile is becoming the preferred channel. So customers prefer to have the bank in their pocket rather than going to the bank. And the romantic walk to the bank, I think, is a dream that has never really existed. And all of this is supported by the fact that 75% of the spending that banks are doing on their technology and on their innovation is on maintenance. And why is that a problem? Because maintenance means you're looking at legacy. And banks are desperately trying to survive in a world that is changing by putting more money into legacy systems. So to use a Henry Ford metaphor that most of you have heard, they're putting their money into creating faster horses rather than thinking about the car. And that is ultimately a very, very crazy thing to do. Another interesting thing I think you should see is competition. This is the HSBC homepage, and this is all the startups and smaller companies that are competing for that page, for the different components of that. And it's impressive and it's scary. If I were a banker, as I was a banker, I was terrified of thinking, who will eat my cake next time? What's interesting about these companies is that they're competing with a monolith that tries to do everything so-so, and each one of these are individuals that are doing one thing only really, really, really well. And it's very hard to compete with that. This is a similar slide for Wells Fargo in America. It's even more crowded and even more scary on what they are doing. But more interesting, this is not just stopping at banking. I thought it would be interesting to show you Apple itself. Apple is being competed against by other startups. This is not just something that is happening to the financial services world. It's happening at everything that we do, at everything that we are engaging with. The reason why all of this is happening is investment. And this is fintech investment. And the number for 2017, it came in at a very, very rich Q3 and Q4, is actually the trajectory is still up. And what this shows you is that money is going for a variety of sources, from angel all the way down to later VC. The numbers of deals is increasing. And money is pouring into a sector which just a few years ago, just 10 years ago, was 1/4 or 1/5 of what's available today. So a dramatic inflow of funds. More interestingly, is actually corporates are investing. These are the big banks. Big banks are actually putting money in startups. And you would think, why would you ever do that? Why would you want to invest in startups? Because they're seeing two opportunities here. One is the traditional upside, which I think is a mistake to invest in that, but they're investing in that. And secondly, they're hoping that this will be an injection of innovation into what they're doing. And they're engaging in that, in investing in these companies. So there's a very big, sharp growth in investment done by the big banks, which is an interesting dimension to explore. The reason why the banks are going there is this interesting chart made by McKinsey a few months back. It shows the upside and the downside of fintech to the big bank. So on the left-hand side, you will see the threats. So a bank has at risk about 35% of their profits because of digital entrants. And these are driven by a variety of things, increase in competitiveness, margin shrinkage, and change in operational costs. But on the other side, they have an upside of 45%. They can have increased revenues for new areas that they can work with, new products, and also, most importantly, a 30% drop in costs if they do internet or digital well. So altogether, the banks are saying, this is an opportunity that I should pursue. The risks are a lot lower than the risk of not doing anything is a lot greater than actually that of pursuing a strategy that potentially does not work out. Another interesting thing to consider is competition from these guys. I'm sure you know all the logos, and you know all of them. And these are the major tech companies worldwide. They all have an incentive in actually entering the financial services world. Now, the most interesting thing about them is that they are not interested in entering the financial services world because they want to make money from banking. They're interested in the financial services world for different things, each one of them a different thing. If you look at Facebook, Facebook is interested in entering financial services world because they want to have your customers' data and your data. They want to understand what you buy, where you travel, and how you engage with money altogether. And that complements your posts on Facebook and complements all of your profile for them to be able to understand and show you ads that are more relevant to you. And Facebook is a formidable animal Because we all think about Facebook, and Facebook is people from my age a bit or older. My kids don't use Facebook, but they use Instagram, and they use all the other apps, a lot of the other apps that they do. So Facebook is actually a multi-dimensional animal that we always think of as Facebook. They're actually a very diverse place. Another interesting point to look at is Google. Google has entered financial services several times, poorly. They haven't done a great job. But eventually they will come back, especially on the back of open APIs that have been created both in Europe and in the States, and moving also into Asia. What they want, again, is your information and data about yourself. And what they will use that is to create better advertising and better search results, but also to reduce their business model. The custom business model right now is a cost per click model. So you click and you can charge whoever the advertiser a certain amount. With your financial data, they can charge a lot more, because if they have searched on Sony, and then you click on Sony and you buy a television on Sony, and it can prove to the advertiser that Sony's television was acquired, they can charge $50 for that click, not 50 cents for that click. It's a very different world. The reason Apple wants to get your financial data is because they want to make sure that your next phone that you buy is an Apple phone. Simple as that. And they want to connect to so many points in your life that it makes it very, very hard to you to walk away, which is very similar to what WeChat is doing. WeChat wants to be part of your whole existence. They want your life to live on WeChat. And the same concept applies there, so that you live in an ecosystem that is defined by, in one case, a manufacturer, in another case, social media. Very similar on the Baidu and the Alibaba. They want your data and they want your engagement with them. The most interesting one to me is Amazon. Amazon has decided that they want to also add financial products to the products that they sell. So you'll be browsing if you buy CDs, you're browsing for your next phone, you're browsing for your groceries on Amazon, but you will also browse for your mortgage. But in order to be able to sell your mortgage, they need to have a relationship with you. They need to have a KYC. They have to be able to do any AML that's required for the financial product to be sold. And that's why they're partnering with a bank. In the case of Amazon, they just partnered with JP Morgan and Chase to launch a bank account. In that way, once you have an account with them, you'll be able to say, I'd like a personal loan to go on holiday, and they will show you all the ads that are available to you on that. And they will become the retailer of this. Now, if you were to look at all of these together, I think there's some themes that emerge. And I think the first theme that is obvious to all of us is that these banks, these organizations have billions and billions of customers, and they have billions and billions of capital. So they are quite formidably strong in doing whatever they're doing. Secondly, they have access to talent. They have access to people who are coders, who understand user experience, who understand what makes customers tick, who understands what makes customers excited. And they have access to those beyond any other player in the market. Third is they hate regulation. And what that means is that they probably won't want to be a bank. They probably would not want to be regulated as a banking organization. And last but not least, they don't really care about banking revenues. Compared to what they are making in their own products, the banking revenues are infinitesimal. So in sum, they want to be offer banking, but they don't want to be banks. So this is the worst possible challenge that you can find. Just think about the music industry when the iPod became an iPhone, and how the world changed dramatically for that industry, just on the back of a manufacturer deciding that they thought that music was going to be a nice thing to have in their user experience. Very dangerous times. So last but not least, I wanted to touch one thing that is driving the challenges for innovation in financial services, and that is the access of talent. And this is slowly realization that talent is a fundamental need, and this goes way beyond the financial services world. This is a study that was done by PwC. They have a CEO survey that they complete every year. This is the 20th one, and I just thought it'd be worthwhile sharing last few years on this. There has been an increased understanding by the CEO of big businesses and businesses altogether that talent is the major challenge that they're facing. 80% of CEOs now think that talent is the biggest challenge that they have. And talent is not just understanding talent, but also retaining talent and attracting talent. And that is something that has to be fundamentally at the core of every need. So to summarize, I think the bottom line is that not becoming digital is no longer an option. It's not something that you can say, I'm okay with what I'm doing, my bank is working well, I don't need to do this. My customers don't like digital. And you'd be surprised how many banks have told me that. It's not possible, it's not true. Digital is coming and there's nothing you can do about it. Competition is coming, and it's coming from a variety of entities. It's not just your traditional competitors, but it's also going to be startups. But more importantly, big tech is coming into financial services, and they're going to be a much more formidable challenger than they are than any of the other competitors you faced before. Competition is increasing in every direction, so it's going to be becoming increasingly competitive, but more importantly, increasingly expensive. And when it's expensive, it favors people with large capital, big tech, big banks, etc. And last but not least, talent is scarce. So finding the right people that understand your business is very, very difficult. Understanding the right people that understand digital and understand your business is even more hard. So you're facing an environment of stark difficulty going forward. So I thought it would be worthwhile just to take the next step is to look at the three main actors in the fintech world and share some thoughts on this. I think we can describe them into three major groups. I think we have the global banks, and these are the top 100 banks in the world. These are banks that have millions and millions of customers, billions of assets, and they have the ability of accessing a huge customer base. They're incredibly complex, and more often than not, they have huge legacy issues that they have to deal with. The next one is the regional banks, and these are the remaining 25,000 global banks. This is everybody from the champion in a specific market all the way down to the small regional bank in a canton in Switzerland. These are our variety of banks. They're all smaller. They have a footprint that is not global. They have a smaller client base, but the client base is more favorable to them. They are more friendly to their customers, to their bank than the others. They have lesser legacy issues, mainly because they're simpler. And they are known, but they're not as well known as the global banks. The third player in the space is the fintechs and the startups. And what's keen about this is, first of all, they're very, very small. They have region at the beginning. They have no customers, practically. At the beginning, at least, they have no customers. They're very simple and very, very, very specialized. They just do one thing well. They have no legacy. They don't have to worry about systems that were designed and coded in COBOL and Fortran 20, 30 years ago. They are completely known. And they're not known. They don't have any PR. They don't have any brand awareness, and so on and so forth, which is an issue, but they are dealing with it. So if we're to look at them in the elements and in the three major drivers of what drives success in fintech, these three players have different positions. Firstly, if we look at access to customers, I think the global banks have largest access to customers than anybody else. The leisure banks have lesser customers, and the fintechs have none, because by definition, a fintech is starting now and they have very, very few customers. If you look at the second metric, access to capital, global banks have huge access to capital. The examples that we saw of investments that we see around the globe, from the BVA to Citibank to Banks of China, all of these are investing heavily in innovation, and it's because they can. Because for them, an 100 million investment in a startup is a rounding error in the global investment that they do on a year's basis. Regional banks have a bit more constrained in capitals, and the reason I put them in the middle is because they have more access to capital than fintechs. But what's interesting, fintechs have less capital in absolute terms, but they have access to exactly the right capital they need to create disruption, and that's what they're doing. The last metric I think is very important is access to talent and access to innovation. The global banks have access to innovation because they pay for it. If they want to innovate, they pay for that. The fintechs have access to innovation because they are innovation. They exist because they're innovative, because they create something new. The regional banks, on the other side, they don't have the money to pay for this, for innovation, or as much as the big banks. They don't have access to the talent that they would get by being a destination because they have their banks. They're not fintechs. They're not digital businesses. And as such, they're most disadvantaged. And if you look at this picture, I think what comes to mind is that the three drivers of success are actually disadvantaging this smaller banking institution, the regional bank, the 25,000 banks that are not in the top 100. And I thought it would be worthwhile to say this and to be completely explicit about this, and you will see this going forward, is that innovation is being dominated right now by the big guys, the very, very big guys, and the fintechs. The cost of competition is becoming incredibly high, and therefore difficult for any medium-sized organization to be able to do well. Talent is very, very scarce. So if you're a big company, you pay lots of money, you can attract it. If you're a fintech and you promise them to be billionaires in a few years' time, you can attract it. The mid-sized banks can't do either. And they have difficulty and attracting talent. And therefore, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to be able to attract innovation and to be able to engage in innovation. And therefore, they risk being left behind. So I don't think everything is lost. I thought it would be worthwhile for me to set together a few guidelines of what can be done for the big banks, the mid-sized banks to respond to this challenge. Because ultimately, they have certain characteristics that would make them succeed in this world. So, first of all, I want to touch on the entrepreneurial aspect. One of the strengths of these smaller banks is they're entrepreneurial. And they're created on a mindset of creating something new and challenging and competing with the others. So the first step they need to do is start telling that and reaffirming this desire to innovate and to compete to their teams. So starting to incentivize and rewarding innovation is fundamental. All banks are, in the last few years at least, in the last decades, have been told that the best way to be successful in a bank is to be predictable, to be reliable, to be quantifiable, and to be measured. What is required now is to do something completely different. So we need to start innovating and rewarding innovation. But that doesn't mean, and that also means that allowing them to make mistakes, allowing your teams to make mistakes, not punishing for their failures, acknowledging their failures, but recognizing that if you've done a reasonable risk, you've taken a reasonable risk, that is acceptable and we're willing to accept it. Secondly, I think it's important to accept failure. I don't agree with people who say celebrate failure. Failure is not a celebration, but learn from it and become capable of understanding that failure is part of life and you have to live with it. But I think the last point is most important. There's an element of digital hype happening right now. And the awareness of realizing what is really relevant to you and to your customers today, beyond what you've been shouted at as fundamental as future, et cetera, is key. So I'm not saying do not invest in the blockchain, do not invest in cryptocurrencies, but is it relevant to your business? And does it change what you do? Or would the money spent on that be more useful in creating a better user experience on the front end, more engagement on multi-channel in your organization, et cetera, et cetera? And I think that is a really important thing to always remember. You have limited capital, limited time, and limited goodwill of your customers. Focusing on what's realistic rather than hype is a fundamental element of importance. Secondly, is to leverage your peers. If the big banks are able to have millions and billions to put into innovation, maybe you can report and engage with them and compete with them through an element of collaboration with your peers. So I've seen examples of joint investment pools where banks come together, banks that are not competing with each other, come together and start thinking, okay, let's invest jointly into this. They also come together in sharing intelligence, sharing understanding of what is happening in the market, and being able to have a thought system, or a thought center in the middle that allows you to exchange some ideas on what is happening, beyond the capability that you would have on your own. Third is also the joint proposition development. Nothing prevents you from choosing one or two partners in a region that you're operating in a non-competitive manner and actually developing joint propositions together. A better user experience on your mobile app, a better use of blockchain and smart contracts, a better use of big data and analyzing data. This is stuff that can be done in a collaborative fashion without losing your competitive edge. Furthermore, what's really important on this is this cross-talent capability, this engagement, will make it easier to attract talent. Because people working with you will see that they will be exposed not only to the challenges of your organization, but also engaging with broader and much more diverse set of partners that they could engage with. Thirdly, is the point of your strengths. I mentioned one of the big strengths of the mid-sized banks is that they are focused and that they have a much more entrepreneurial approach to what to do things. Use this fact to drive your ability to innovate. So focus your efforts. You don't have that much of assets, you don't have that much time. Focus on what you're really good at. So engage on innovation that is relevant to what you do and relevant to your customer. Secondly is leverage the fact that you're less bureaucratic in general than the big banks and you have less legacy issues to worry about. Your platforms may not be the newest in the world, but not as bad as banks that were established 50, 60 years ago. And you're able to use this nimbleness to create solutions more quickly and propositions more quickly than your competitors, and therefore be able to challenge them. And last but not least is your customers. On average, smaller banks' customers are more positive to their bank. They feel the bank, they have a relationship with the bank. This is very much true in Europe. I'm sure it's true also in Asia. And the engagement of the customer with the regional bank that goes beyond just a big brand. It goes to an affiliated set of approaches, affiliated set of history possibly going together, that allows you to have a certain element of goodwill. Include your customers in your development of new propositions, much more than the big banks are able to do. You're able to engage with them a lot more closely than the big banks are able to do. So leverage these things. The last point I wanted to make is don't do it yourself. One of the big things about, if you look about how the big banks are slowly realizing, is that they don't have to build everything on their own. They don't have to create the most perfect data analytics capability. They don't have to create the most beautiful web app and so on and so forth on their own. Partnering is a very efficient way of delivering change and delivering innovation. And one of the things that we've seen is that regional banks are not engaging with the fintech world as much as they could. And that's a shame, because they can be a much more interesting partner to a fintech. If you think about it, a fintech has a very simple set of rules. What they need to do is to prove to their investors or potential future investors that their proposition works. And they want to do this by showing it in use with customers. And they want to be able to go to market with a proposition that then is adopted by a certain number of people, and then they can go back to the next funding round and say, look, I have proven that the concept works, these customers are using that, and therefore the proposition is worth a lot more than it was when you saw me last time, okay? Now, what they're doing right now is the only players in the market that are allowing them to do this are the big banks. The big banks are going to them and saying, let's do a POC, let's do a pilot, and so on and so forth. And these fintechs are saying, okay, I'll work with you because I want to generate this thing with you. The fact that these big banks have millions and millions of customers worldwide is almost irrelevant to them, because the pilots are usually done in one market only. And as such, a regional bank would be, in fact, a better partner than a global bank, because they have, first of all, an awareness and, as I said, the goodwill of the customer, but more importantly, they have less bureaucracy. And they would be able to get a pilot and a proposition developed in record time much more quickly than a big bank can do. So you can see a pilot launching in 3 months rather than 18 months with a mid-sized bank, rather than 18 months with a big bank, and that's a big plus. The problem is that the regional banks are not engaging with the fintech space as much as they should. And this is a bit of an inferiority complex. You don't see them in big conferences on fintechs. You don't see them at Money 2020. You don't see them at Finovate. You don't see them present in engaging with these companies, with the fintechs. And I think that's a fundamental element that needs to happen, a change of mindset where we're able to see that the mid-sized banks consider themselves as a worthy partner to the fintechs, because they are, in fact, a better partner than the big guys would be. And in choosing your partner, I would also suggest do not underestimate partnering with big tech. Because if you think about it, these big tech companies, yes, they want to have a global solution, but they don't need to have a global partner for their solution. They would prefer to have local players in every market, and engaging with them could be a really interesting way of extending your value proposition to your customers and getting even closer to your customers. So don't think about big tech as the worst possible enemy. They could actually be your friends. So to close, I just want to say that there is a risk for regional banks to be marginalized, but this is not something that we should be worried about too much. There's something that can be done about it, and this is not something that you should be, the battle is not won, it's not over, and there's a lot of opportunities to be done. Regional banks are distinctive in their ability to challenge the big guys, the big tech, and the fintechs in this market because of their agility and because of their entrepreneurship and the way they deal with challenges, which is heading them face on. And that is something that has to be extended to fintech. One of the interesting things that we have mentioned, it's always implicit in what we do, is customer centricity and the fact that the big banks focus on the customer, understand the customer very clearly. This goes back to the concept of the bank in Genoa in the 15th century I was telling you about. At the core of that banking, it was a relationship with a segment of one. The bank who looked at the other customer, and that was a segment of one. The proposition was developed there. Mid-sized banks have to go back to that mindset of thinking in a way that the customer is still at the center, but at the center and engaging in everything that the customer wants, understanding their needs in a way that is visible to the customer. You've done that already in the past. That can happen again in the future. And last but not least, do not underestimate the potential of partnering, because it's the fastest way to be able to deliver successful innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hatami.